Welcome, everyone. It is your host, Iman, and today I'm finding grounding in mistakes that I am noticing in other people's content, podcasts, books, and what have you. And you might be wondering, why am I finding grounding in other people's mistakes? And I promise it's not for a shady reason. It's actually because I've recently been experiencing a lot of writer's block. I submitted my first article to be published for a journal, and how that works is, as an academic, as a scholar, as a writer, you submit an article to a journal in your field. And once you submit it to that journal in the field, then they send it out for what people call blind peer review. And they send it out to other experts in your field to essentially verify that this is a good article and you know what you're talking about. And so you can either get rejected, accepted with minor revisions, or just accepted outright. And I'm really excited. An article that I've been working on for a long time got accepted with minor revisions. And I am now in the phase of addressing the revisions that I needed to do based on the reviewer feedback. And I really struggle in the feedback editing process of writing. Why I have many reasons that I have thought about deeply with my therapist, but one of them being primarily this kind of insistence upon perfection that I place on myself, which I know is very gendered, very racialized, very much so an expectation placed on Black women where perfection is expected in order to have access or the same kind of credibility that other people's work has. This is my first time going through the process, and I've just had a real block on being able to process and read that feedback. It's so funny. When I initially read it, I open feedback and then I close it and then I won't look at it for a couple of weeks until I feel like I'm in a space to actually receive it. And it's crazy how the tone that I read the feedback in the first time upon my initial read versus how I'm able to now read it and process it and actually be so grateful for the work and the thought and the intellectual labor that other people did so that this article could be the best version of itself. And I know this and I feel this way, but at the same time, at least for me, it's really hard to change something that I have formulated in my mind. And it's also really hard for me not to see somebody telling me they think I should change something as them telling me that they think it's wrong. And it's crazy because I'm a professor. I give my students feedback on their writing. And the feedback that I give them doesn't mean that I don't think that the work is good. I'm just like, this could be better. But it's one thing to be giving it and it's another thing to be receiving it. And I think because this was my first real article that I thought, okay, I'm going to put this out in the world. I'm having a hard time that, oh my God, what if when I do these revisions, it's still not perfect? Oh my God, I don't get another round of revisions for somebody to confirm that what I changed it to is actually going to be good and is better. I've been really struggling with the idea that this thing is not going to be perfect. And I say it out loud and it's, yes, of course, girl, nothing is ever going to be perfect. This is your first journal article. You are essentially, and not in an infantilizing way, but essentially a baby academic, a junior academic. There's also an added layer now where I feel like because I no longer have the guise of being a graduate student, that people might engage my work a little bit more harshly than before, but that might be my own preoccupations. But all that to say is, I've been having these thoughts, having these anxieties that are actually making me be extremely slow in the editing and the revision process. I've been getting in my own way a lot, where before I even make an edit or write something in my mind, I'm already telling myself this isn't going to be good enough, this isn't the right version, what have you. And so at the same time that I have been struggling with this, I've also have been noticing a uptick, and perhaps this is just because my mind, my guides, they want me to see this, really small mistakes in other people's books or in other people's podcasting, where maybe they put in the outro twice, or they forgot to edit out a retake, or I'm reading a passage out loud to my students from a book that I love and I'm noticing, oh my God, there's a typo there. And so have been collecting all of these small moments of other people's mistakes and work that I love, right? Work that I would never say there's a small mistake here, so obviously it's not perfect. I think this is perfect because it exists in the world as is. And so having reminders that work that I love and adore has these small moments that you can tell that because of the mistakes also that somebody human made it. And I just want to repeat that. It's because of the small mistakes that I find in things in myself and other people's work. I actually prize and cherish that because it's a signal to me that somebody human and something human made it. Especially when there's so much burden of perfection in this moment of AI, where things are, yes, grammatically correct, but they are lifeless, they're soulless. And you can feel that in writing. You can feel that in people's, production of their podcasts and of their other kind of thought works. And so I am just finding grounding in a moment where there's so much emphasis on AI and perfection that mistakes in projects are going to feel like a warm hug and just something to be cherished, because it's a sign that somebody breathing and alive, somebody who was vulnerable to just put out their creation as is, did it. I'm over an era of perfectly curated, refined, grammatically correct work and things. And so that is where I'm finding my grounding today in mistakes, because it is also giving me permission that I can make my own mistakes as well. And that just makes me human. And that doesn't mean that something isn't perfect or something isn't ready to be put out in the world, which is a perfect segue to our grounding question of the day, which is, what counts as knowledge? And this is a question that is near and dear to my heart, because as a graduate student, as a young person in college, what made me feel so transformed in my thinking was encountering what folks call Black feminist epistemologies and realizing that the things that I didn't think were as credible forms of knowledge as others have actually been more crucial and more important than ever. And so feeling transformed by what folks called a Black feminist epistemology is like a big word for saying Black feminist modes of knowing, or Black femmes modes of knowing, or Black women's modes of knowing, or Black queer folks modes of knowing. These modes of knowing that are considered alternative or not as valuable as other forms of knowing. And the way that I saw Black feminist scholars think with these modes of knowing and also adopt them in their own work completely transformed how I thought about myself as a knowledge producer, how I thought about myself as somebody who loves engaging with intellectual works and academia. It really opened up my eyes to seeing that the thing that everybody told me equates to knowledge, books, things backed by billion-dollar industries, numbers. If you can't prove it through statistics and observation and what have you, then it's not real. Sight, seeing, a very limited sensorial understanding of what are mediums and modes of knowing. Once I saw and engaged with Black feminist thought that kind of busted the lid on that very contained understanding of what counts as knowledge, I personally was transformed. I'm going to say over and over again, right? What drew me to religious studies, what drew me to understanding Black women's religious and spiritual lives was seeing the way that they relied on alternative modes of knowing to survive, to keep on keeping on, to resist in really minor ways in some cases and really extravagant, extraordinary ways in others. But seeing how those alternative modes of knowing, how relying on your own sense of things, how relying on lived experience, on relying on dreams, relying on things that your mother has told you, relying on folklore, relying on histories that have been buried, were all important to their life ways, to keeping them alive, to keeping the generations ahead of them alive. So this is a classic question of intellectual history and Black feminist thought, Black feminist modes of knowing that really converted me into academia. Once I saw that this could be a mode of studying, I could think with these modes of knowing, I was hooked. I wanted to do it for the rest of my life. I felt called to it. And even that language of feeling called to something, I always hesitate using it because it just feels extremely Christian to me, but there's a real truth in it. That's knowledge about what you are supposed to be doing doesn't always have to come from the powers that be. And the powers that you can see, you can feel called by something that you can't see, something within you, something above you, something not of this world. So that's what drew me into being an intellectual historian and taking up this particular kind of field of work in religious studies and thinking about Black women's modes of knowing. And so you can't answer the question about what counts as knowledge without answering the question of who gets to decide what counts as knowledge. In this question of who gets to decide what counts as knowledge and the answers produced by it by Black women across the 20th century, the 21st century has been named by many names. I just want to list a few because I think that they are so amazing. Sylvia Wynter called it the coloniality of being that gets to decide what counts as knowledge and also who counts as human. Patricia Hill Collins called it the Eurocentric masculine knowledge validation process, right? This idea that science, numbers, quantitative over qualitative, what can be proven, these very masculinist modes of knowing, that is what decides what does and doesn't count as knowledge. My girl Safiya Bukhari, the Black Panther veteran and the Black Liberation Army veteran, called it the beast of American racism, capitalism, and sexism. So whether it be the coloniality of being, the beast of American racism, sexism, and capitalism, or the Eurocentric masculine knowledge validation process, what all of these terms and names get at is that what counts as legitimate knowledge has always been established and pre-established by the ruling elite. And this has produced a particular kind of prioritization and valuing of certain forms of knowledge. So whether it be science and technology, industrialization, mechanics, engineering, this kind of quantitative systems-oriented thinking, that becomes not just the primary mode of what is valued as a legitimate form of knowledge, it becomes almost an exclusive mode of what counts as knowledge. The only kind of knowledge you can cite in the public sphere for supporting your own decision making, right? If you say, well, I relied on my gut, right? I relied on my feeling. That's what told me, that business move I should take or who I should sell my products to or what have you. That's not something you can say in a public sphere, in a bank or what have you, that is going to make somebody give you that bank loan, right? In this system, in this world that we built. Sylvia Wynter talks about the coloniality of being. And what she means by that is this idea where man is seen as being able to dominate and tell you absolutely everything about the natural world, meaning that you can see it all, you understand it all, that we can conceptualize it all. There's nothing about this natural world that we can't predict and know and see with our own eyes and observe with our own eyes. And so that's at a very theoretical level, right, of what has counted as knowledge. But let's take it to our own kind of contemporary context and break it down. So, for example, I don't think we can say enough. I don't feel like it's, for lack of a better phrase, beating a dead horse, how much algorithms determine what knowledge is validated. So I'll use this as an example, TikToking, or when I comment on things on social media, right? I am someone who can do both, right? I can comment on pop culture. I can also break down a recent theoretical book. But when I comment on pop culture, let's say I'm talking about specifically, like I had a lot of stuff go semi-viral when I was talking about the show Industry. The moment that I would talk about a particular kind of pop culture phenomenon, my views would skyrocket compared to if I was having a video that was talking about, let's say, breaking down, as I'm doing right now, Black feminist thought. The way that the algorithm pushes pop culture, and in pop culture in a very narrow sense, and decides that content being backed by billion-dollar entertainment industries and streaming platforms then is going to get pushed to more viewers, or content that is like exclusively beauty and lifestyle and selling you products, that's going to have 20 million views rather than somebody kind of critiquing consumerism or reporting on a recent labor strike. That is an understanding, people call it techno-fascism, techno-feudalism, where the algorithm determines what knowledge and what kind of content gets pushed to us, right? What we see, what's considered credible. Another example, I remember when I was growing up and I would go to Walmart and there would be a book section, and there was literally a Black books section. that crossed all genres, romance, biography, what have you. But then there would be other sections where it was sparsed out by genre, right? Where it was biographies, fiction, nonfiction, what have you. The Black books were always at the end of the aisle. And so we see how a billion-dollar corporation tells us what knowledge is more valuable. Another example we can think about this is, and I have to watch myself about this all of the time, is a version of academic elitism, where we only want to hear things that are by academics, or we don't want to believe it if there's not a particular citation to it. Yes, there is 100% value in that. Absolutely, especially when we are in an anti-intellectualism environment where there is a real devaluing of academia, of the humanities, of expertise, and what have you. But that cannot also come at the expense of a certain kind of academic elitism that says the only forms of knowledge that we are going to be interested in validating and propping up are those by people with PhDs, are the kinds of knowledge contained in books. Because let's be very clear, all of those systems, first off, have barriers to entry. I am not the face of academia, as much as I would like to be the face of academia. But in terms of what I study, who I am, how I talk, the knowledge systems and the traditions that I come from, that I'm a part of, that I'm a daughter of, but also a professor of, and study and teach, that what you're seeing here, what you're hearing here is a huge anomaly to how academia actually works. So, for example, every week I come on here and I do a form of what I consider public humanities and public scholarship, right? I'm constantly producing thought, conversation, critique around knowledge, around culture, around books in my field. Every week I'm giving you a list of books and engaging with them. This podcast, none of it is going to count towards my 10-year review, which is going to be the thing that decides at the end of my 6-year contract if I still have a job. None of this public work that I think is so important is actually going to help me maintain my job in 6 years. We're living in a changing landscape, but I'm telling you right now, I cannot put this weekly production, this weekly audio publication is not going to count towards my job profile. It's not going to land me a more lucrative academic job. And that's because this version of knowledge production, or oral and verbal knowledge production, knowledge sharing that we're doing right here, is not considered valuable in an academic sense. So again, we have to see how the powers that be, whether it be publishing, whether it be streaming, whether it be algorithms, all get to decide what does and does not count as knowledge. And once we see the mechanisms of who and what is able to tell us what does and does not count as knowledge, then we can begin to point our direction to alternative forms of knowledge, which is where I want to go next. Because what has counted as knowledge has always extended beyond the status quo. I really like the way that two Black feminist and queer theorists think about this, and that is Zakiyyah Iman Jackson and Keeling. And so they have these two ideas. Zakiyyah Iman Jackson says that the world, how we know it, is structured as the world as such, meaning we're told that there is the world, not many worlds or a world in which we all contribute, but we are told that there is the world and it is as such. And so she turns to folks like Octavia Butler and other literary scholars, other writers, to get at the idea that Black women have always produced forms of knowledge that have always challenged this idea of the world as such. And I love that she talks about these alternative modes of knowing through calling it a particular kind of vertigo. I don't know if anyone has ever experienced vertigo, but it's when your sense of things, whether it be you're going down a stairs, movement, or what have you, sensorially the world, the physical world around you starts looking and feeling different. It messes with your equilibrium. All of a sudden, you are not in the world as such. And so she talks about Black women's modes of knowing through her own reading of fiction as producing alternative modes of knowing that are something akin to vertigo. If you've ever experienced vertigo, I think this is a really apt metaphor. This is something I've experienced, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. Having all these alternative modes of knowing can be a kind of vertigo. And then there's another theorist that I love. Her name is Bukhari Keeling, and she talks about this in terms of the witch's flight. And I just love that word flight. It's something that I just recently used in my own kind of writing about Black Muslim thought. It's this idea that Black women's modes of knowing are in flight, are flying away from very common sense notions of how we know the world. So again, starting with the theory, but let's talk about what that looks like on a really practical way. I'm always going to give you examples, right? So what are all of these alternative modes of knowing that we can rely on that allow us to see beyond the world as such? So these include intuition, gut feelings, dreams, folklore, that one time, what your mama said, yapping with your girls, that poem you read, callings, conversations with unseen forces, aha moments, voices and knowledge that come to you that feel like, wow, that really must have come from something beyond me, even though I'm feeling the knowledge and hearing the knowledge inside me. You know what I'm talking about if you know what I'm talking about. Whisper networks, right? The things that your coworkers, your sisters, your moms, your aunties whisper to you as knowledge that they can't say out loud, but that are necessary for you to make sure that you're good. Lived experience. This is a super important one, right? A Black feminist mode of knowing has a particular definition of wisdom. And Patricia Hill Collins talks about this, where wisdom does not equal just knowledge. Me watching a bunch of TikToks and reading things about something is going to give me knowledge about it. But until I actually go out into that real world and experience that knowledge, see it firsthand, I'm not going to have wisdom about it. And I think that's a really important distinction where in a world where we're having shifting understandings of what expertise is, to rather than have expertise equate to a particular kind of elitism, that degree, that job, by thinking to yourself, actually, I'm going to have expertise equate to both knowledge of and experience. I think that's a really non-hierarchical way we can start to think about expertise beyond elitism. And Black feminist thought, Black feminist modes of knowing, or Black feminist epistemologies give us that. We can think of some concrete historical examples. I believe in episode 2, we talked about Harriet Tubman and we talked about Alexis Pauline Gumbs and the dream that Harriet Tubman had before the Combahee River raid, where she led enslaved people against Confederate forces to their own liberation and as an effort towards the end of enslavement. And a year before that raid, while they were in the midst of planning it, she had a dream and she woke up from that dream. She had a dream of their victory and she woke up from that dream saying, my people are free. Not my people will be free in the future sense, but my people are free. And it was that knowledge that she received from that dream that allowed her to execute and plan this raid and know that it was going to be a success. That is knowledge that she did not get from looking out into a world of enslavement and plantation economy and the brutality against the Black people during plantation and in slavery, but it was a dream and knowledge from that dream that allowed her to see that it was possible. So again, we see how a dream becomes an alternative mode of knowing that allows one to imagine beyond the world as such. Then we get, of course, as I'm always going to say, my girl Safiya Bukhari. She says she broke out from prison on New Year's Eve 1976 in order to seek life-saving medical treatment against orange-sized fibroid tumors that were causing her to hemorrhage and that prison doctors would not treat. Right? She is this amazing Black revolutionary who has this history. And when she asks what assisted her and led her to her escape, she talks about a vision that she received from the divine, from Allah. Her material conditions and everything in front of her told her that captivity was her future. Captivity was the only possibility, right? But it was this vision from Allah that she saw, as she says, of a path forward that allowed her to see a different possibility of her being, to see her temporary freedom. Allah also showed her that she would be recaptured. But again, it is a alternative mode of knowing, this particular vision, this particular 101 conversation with the divine that allows her to have access to an alternative mode of knowing beyond the world as such, beyond her immediate conditions as such, beyond what people are telling her. And I tell my students, and so these are all right examples of when knowledge comes to you from alternative sources. And, you know, of course, I am like turning to these, what one would consider very spiritual examples, because those are ones that I love, right? But this is also the kind of knowledge that you get from lived experience, of knowing things, of having knowledge about things. For example, one thing that I frequently do is that anyone who reaches out to me and wants to know about grad school, I always respond and I always say yes. I send people my former application materials. I read people's things. And that is because I know that the knowledge out there about that process does not always equate to how Black students need to position themselves within academia. The kinds of things that Black folks need to say in applications and the kinds of, for lack of better words, grammars that they need to adopt in order to be legible to the system, right? And I have this experience from my own lived experience, seeing the ways that my own thinking has been received, adjusting it so people can hear me while also remaining true to it, pushing the boundary here, saying what I want to say, but positioning it a little differently. That is wisdom that I have, knowledge that I have gained through study, but also knowledge that I have gained through experience. So it is because of that knowledge and that experience, that's an alternative mode of knowing that I am also then trying to pass on to other people. And I don't put it behind a paywall because I think that putting processes behind paywalls is diabolical. Of course, putting your intellectual property, for sure, put that behind a paywall. Your writing, your creation, your art, your intellectualism, your book, for sure. But I don't know, there's something that is very icky to me about when people put a paywall behind things like how to get into grad school or how to break into systems that are already predicated on white supremacy, and you put a paywall in order to have access to that knowledge just feels really complicit to me in ways that don't, for me, reflect the Black mode of being. Because the reason that I am here is because Black people have been generous in sharing the knowledge of how to get into these systems and how to excel in them and exceed in them. But coming back to my point, right? These are alternative modes of knowing, whether it be dreams, whether it be knowledge plus lived experience equal wisdom, whether it be callings, whether it be gut feelings, whether it be your intuition. In this moment right now, my intuition is screaming at me, as I talked about 2 episodes now ago. My intuition is screaming at me that I need to slow down, that I need to start restructuring my life in a way that feels better. I need to work on certain things of my internal voice that doesn't make me be the biggest hurdle to myself when I'm writing, right? My intuition is screaming this knowledge at me, right? If anything, the world as it is tells me that I should feel this way. I should feel small and beaten down and have a particular kind of obsession with perfection and getting everything right. But my intuition is telling me, no, girl, this mode of knowing that you are hearing from all the powers that be is holding you back. We need to get right about this. So again, listening to these gut feelings, listening to this knowledge, listening to this intuition, these have always been alternative modes of knowing and alternative expressions of knowledge that have always been vital to Black people's survival, Black people's refusal of the world as is. And I cannot say enough that these are the modes of knowing that AI cannot copy. And I'm going to say that again. These are the kinds of modes of knowing that AI cannot replicate, cannot bottle, cannot sell. And in a world where AI is dominating what looks like knowledge and who counts as knowledgeable, what things you need actual humans for, and what things can be farmed out to big tech and an algorithm, it is going to be more important than ever that we have a really astute and keen understanding of alternative modes of knowing that are distinctly human, that are only capable through the human or the sentient experience and not just relegated to humans, because I think animals and other things have this. But it is going to be more important than ever that we are able to cultivate these modes of knowing and develop senses for them so that we can hear them in a world where people are telling us you don't need humans to produce knowledge. These alternative modes of knowing, gut feelings, intuitions, dreams, what your mama said, experience, that one time, yapping with your girls, whisper networks, the things you hear on the low, all of these things are going to be more important than ever for our understanding of knowledge and navigating this world and imagining the world beyond what it is in this moment, imagining the world beyond the world as such, imagining modes of being human beyond the coloniality of being, imagining the world beyond what the beast of American racism, capitalism, and sexism tells us it can be. These alternative modes of knowing are going to be more important than ever. So that is what I leave us with today. Today, I'm actually leaving feeling very empowered as a reminder that, gosh, I have so much more cultivation for myself of these modes of being. I've done the intuition classes. I journal to get right by my inner voice. I go to therapy. I do the work. I try to move my body. I talk with my friends. I try to be in conversation. But this is a lifetime commitment, and one that I am reminded that as I'm feeling bogged down by perfectionism, and as I'm feeling bogged down in my own kind of thoughts, that this is actually a sign more than ever that I need to rely on my own intuition, my own sense of things, my own possibilities of being outside of what those voices are telling me. So if you like this episode, I really hope that you share with a friend, and I really hope that you guys can also connect with me on social media, on Instagram, TikTok. I'm always looking for listener questions for episodes. Those are my favorite ones to do. My handles are IMANABDK on TikTok, on Instagram, and you can also find me by searching IMANABDK on YouTube if you're listening to on audio. And I'm actually very excited because I think now the platform that I use for the podcasting, we also are going to be on video on Apple Podcasts. So very exciting. So I love you all so much. I hope you have just an amazing day. This episode is actually going to come out on the day that I participate in my graduation ceremony. I've been graduated since December, but I get to actually, celebrate now this milestone with friends and family back in New Haven, and, walk that Yale stage and kind of wrap up what has felt like a bit of a prolonged ending and the beginning of a new chapter at the same time, which I'm actually on my way to work now for our faculty retreat. But I love you guys very much. Let me know how you're doing. Send me some good vibes on my graduation day by following, subscribing, sending me a listener question, and I will see you guys next Monday. Bye-bye.